She was 18 years old, and she had just been put out of her own home. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a suitcase packed and set on the front step, and a door that would not open for her again. Almost a year later, with all but the last of the money she had, she bid $10 on an abandoned gas station at a forgotten crossroads in the high desert of New Mexico, in a town so small that the population sign read 11. The roof was peeled back to the rafters. 2 rusted pumps stood out front like grave markers. The county clerk said the place should have been bulldozed years ago, because somewhere under the ground there might still be old fuel tanks no one wanted to touch. But what no one in that county knew was that beneath the floor of that little repair garage, inside a space that had been sealed for nearly 20 years, was something that would change not only her life, but the life of the whole town. Before we go any further, if stories like this mean something to you, take a second and hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Della Mercer was born in Amarillo, Texas, in a low-frame house with a chain-link fence and a stunted sycamore tree in the front yard. Her mother worked the register at a big grocery store, and for most of Della's childhood, her mother was a tired woman, but still a gentle one. Her father had left when Della was 4, and she remembered almost nothing of him, only a smell of cigarettes and a low laugh carried in from the porch. The thing that kept Della's childhood from collapsing entirely was her grandfather, Hollis Mercer, a retired mechanic who lived 3 blocks away. Hollis had a small garage behind his house, a garage that smelled of old motor oil and rubber and something like warm metal under sun. Every afternoon after school, Della walked over, climbed onto a 3-legged stool, and watched him take an engine apart bolt by bolt, the way a man works a puzzle he already knows the answer to. Hollis did not talk much, but he taught her everything he knew, not with words but by putting a wrench in her hand and letting her feel it for herself. She learned to listen to a running engine and know where it hurt. She learned to torque a bolt to the right tightness and then stop, never overdo it. She learned that everything that breaks breaks for a reason, and that if you are patient enough, you will find it. The year Della turned 12, Hollis handed her a case folding knife with a bone handle, worn smooth from 40 years in his pocket, with the letters H stamped into the side. "You hold on to that," he said. "A good tool finds the hand that needs it." Della did not fully understand him at 12, but she kept that knife from that day on. Hollis died of a heart attack on a March morning when Della was 15. They found him next to a 1978 Chevrolet he had been fixing for a neighbor, for free. The garage closed up. Her grandmother had passed years before, and Della's world, which had only ever been truly warm inside the oil smell of that garage, went cold. Around that same time, her mother began seeing a man named Ray. Ray installed roofing, drove a loud truck, and had a voice that was always a little louder than the room required. He moved in when Della was 16. At first, it was only tense dinners and remarks about Della being underfoot. Then it became Ray drinking and her mother staring down at her plate. Della did not argue. She had learned long ago that arguing with men like Ray was like torquing a stripped bolt. The harder you push, the worse it gets. She withdrew into quiet, took an after-school job at a car wash, and counted the days until she was 18. She did not have to count as long as she thought. On the morning she turned 18, a hot and dusty morning in May, Della came downstairs and found her suitcase already packed and sit by the front door. On the lid was a note in her mother's handwriting. "Della, you're grown now. Ray and I need our own space. When you can take care of yourself, this will be easier on everyone." Beside the note was an envelope. Inside the envelope was $100. Della read the note, she read it again. Then she picked up the suitcase, the envelope, and a sand-colored canvas bag holding a few clothes and her grandfather's toolbox, and she walked out the door. She did not look back. The year that followed was a long one. Della does not like to tell about it, and in her notebook, she wrote almost nothing of it. She slept in the 1994 Ford Ranger her grandfather had left her, a truck with 211,000 miles on it that still ran clean because she kept it that way. She worked whatever there was. She changed oil at a tire shop. She mopped floors at a late-night diner. She fixed window units for cash. She learned which truck stops you could shower at without being run off, which churches gave breakfast on Sundays, where to park to sleep under a light so no one bothered you. She got thinner. Her hands got harder. But she never once called home. Whenever she was afraid, she took out her grandfather's folding knife, opened it, and closed it. Open, close. That small, solid click was the only sound left in her life that meant safe. There was one night she did not like to remember, but remembered anyway. It was a January night in a grocery store parking lot in Lubbock, cold enough that she had to run the engine in short bursts to stay warm, and every time she ran it she watched the fuel needle drop and did the math on how many more nights she had. She had counted her money and found $23. She sat there with both hands on the wheel, her breath fogging the glass, and for the first time since the day she was put out, she let herself cry. Not from the cold, not from hunger, but from the thought that maybe no one on earth was keeping track of whether she lived or died. She took out her grandfather's knife and opened it and closed it, opened it and closed it, until her breathing leveled out. Then she wiped her face, pulled her coat up to her chin, and slept. The next morning she found an oil change place that paid cash, worked 3 shifts, and by night she had $40 more. She did not cry again after that night. She just kept going. It was the only thing she knew how to do. One afternoon in late summer, sitting in a small-town public library to use the free Wi-Fi, Della came across a notice on the website of Guadalupe County, New Mexico. It was a list of properties being sold to settle unpaid taxes. Most were empty lots and a couple of broken-down trailers. But at the bottom of the list was something that stopped her. An old gas station and repair garage at the junction of Highway 104 and a dirt road, near a place called Comanche Wells, half an acre, vacant since 2005. Minimum bid, $10. Below the price was a single line set in italics. Buyer assumes any and all environmental remediation obligations related to underground fuel storage tanks. Sold as is, $10. A gas station, a garage. Della looked at that screen for a long time. A garage. She thought about her grandfather, about the smell of oil, about the 3-legged stool. She thought about the line, "A good tool finds the hand that needs it." She did not know whether an abandoned gas station counted as a tool. But for the first time in a year, she felt something pull her toward a direction instead of just letting her drift. She had $187.40 left. She had half a tank of gas. She had her grandfather's knife. She closed the laptop, walked out to the truck, and drove west. Guadalupe County sits in the high desert of New Mexico, where red dirt runs out to the horizon, and juniper bushes cling low and gray to the sides of flat-topped hills. Della drove almost 5 hours, windows down, hot wind coming in off the land carrying the smell of dust and juniper resin and something dry and clean she had never smelled in Texas. When she turned off the interstate onto Old Highway 104, the road narrowed, the asphalt cracked, and the only things she passed in 30 miles were a hawk on a fence post and the rusted carcass of a pickup lying in a ditch. Comanche Wells appeared in the late afternoon light like something the desert had forgotten mid-sentence. There was a row of adobe buildings half collapsed. There was a small church with a locked door and a peeling sign. There was a post office no bigger than a closet, and a rusted marker that read Population 11. And at the crossroads, where the highway met a dirt road running off toward distant ranches, stood the station. Della shut off the engine and sat a while, just looking. The station was smaller than she'd pictured, but sturdier too. It was a cinder block building with a shed roof and a concrete canopy reaching out over 2 old pumps. The white paint had gone yellow and was flaking off, showing the gray block underneath. The 2 pumps stood there, rusted, their glass faces broken but standing straight. On the front wall, above the door to the repair bay, was a line of hand-painted letters, mostly faded, that she could only half make out from the truck. She got out to read it. Gravel ground under her boots. Wind came through the canopy with a long, low moan. And when she looked up, she read the whole line, though the red paint had bleached to a pale coral. "No one gets left on the side of the road." Della stood there in the honey-colored light and read it over and over. She did not understand why an abandoned gas station would carry a line like that, but she felt as though it had been written for her. If you're still with us, take a second and subscribe, because what's hidden under that garage floor is something even the town itself had forgotten. The Guadalupe County office was in the town of Santa Rosa, 40 miles from Comanche Wells. The next morning, Della went in with her printed notice and her $187. The woman behind the property desk was around 60, gray hair pinned up, a silver Navajo necklace at her throat, and a voice slow enough that you understood she was in no hurry to be anywhere. Her name was Pearl Quintana, and she had worked that office for 26 years. Pearl looked at the notice. She looked at Della. She looked at the notice again. "Old Truitt place," she said. It was not a question. Asa Truitt. Passed in 2011, no wife, no kids, just a nephew who couldn't be bothered to come to the funeral. Taxes went unpaid, the state foreclosed, the redemption time ran out 3 years back, and it's been up for auction season after season with nobody bidding. Folks are scared of those fuel tanks underground. Cleaning them out can run $100,000. She paused, studying Della. Where'd you come from, honey? Texas, Amarillo, and how old are you? 19. Pearl set the notice down and looked at her. For a long moment, the look of a woman who had sat behind that desk 26 years and seen every kind of person walk through. 26 years I've worked here, she said slowly, and I never had a 19-year-old drive in from Texas to buy a $10 gas station. The people who ask about these are land speculators or retirees looking for somewhere to dry out. She paused. You sure, honey? I have to ask. It's hard country. Nobody lives within miles. You'd have to run power back out, drill a well, or test the old one. And those tanks are a real burden. I'm sure, Della said. I don't have anywhere else to go. Pearl looked at her a moment more. Then she did something Della would remember for the rest of her life. She opened her own purse, took out a $10 bill, and laid it on the counter beside the paperwork. I'll cover the bid. You keep your money for food. She began filling out the form. The recording and transfer fee came to $43.12, and that part Della paid, counting it out a bill at a time. Welcome to Guadalupe County, Miss Mercer, Pearl said, and slid an old ring of keys across the counter, tied with a slip of paper that read Truty Station. On the drive back to Comanche Wells, Della counted her money, $144.28, a ring of keys, a knife, and a gas station in the middle of the desert that was now, legally, hers. She could not go inside that first night. It was nearly dark, and she wanted to see everything clearly. She slept in the truck in the dirt lot out front, doors locked, knife open in the cup holder, the line on the wall above her fading into the dark like a promise she did not yet understand had been made. By whom? To whom? The next morning, Della opened the repair bay with one of the old keys. The rolling steel door shrieked up in a long, dusty groan, then stuck halfway, and she had to use both hands to force it the rest of the way. Sunlight poured into the bay, and dust rose into the air in floating bands of light. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust, let her nose adjust to the smell of a place shut up for 20 years. Old motor oil, dust and cement, a faint sour smell of rusted metal, and under all of it, very faint, something that made her chest tighten, a smell exactly like her grandfather's garage in Amarillo. The repair bay was a wide room with a concrete floor, a service pit down the middle, and a long workbench against the back wall. On the bench, a whole row of tools still hung on a rack under dust as thick as felt. There was a vise clamped to the bench, its jaws gone to rust. Tires were stacked in one corner, the rubber cracked and bleached. There was a calendar on the wall from a motor oil company, open to April of 2005, a photo of a desert road at dusk. 20 years ago, someone had turned the page to April and then never turned it again. Behind the bay was a small office. Della went in. There was a wooden desk, a swivel chair, a small old combination floor safe in the corner, locked, and a wall covered with things tacked up. She went close and looked. They were photographs, dozens of photographs gone yellow, of people standing beside their cars in front of the station. A family by a station wagon. A young soldier in uniform beside a bicycle. An old woman by a Buick. And in nearly every photo, standing at the edge of the frame, was the same man. Tall, lean, an oil-stained cap on his head, two big hands and eyes crinkled from smiling. Under one photo, in pencil, someone had written, Asa and the Begays fixed their water pump, 1987. Asa Truitt. This was the face of the man who had painted "No one gets left on the side of the road" onto his own wall. Della spent her first 3 days just cleaning. She had no money to hire anyone, so she did it all by hand. She swept 20 years of dust off the concrete. She wiped down every tool on the rack and was surprised to find them sound, good steel, from a time when men made tools to last a lifetime. She pumped the old well behind the building and was glad to find it still worked. The water cloudy at first, then clearing. Every night she slept in the truck, and every morning she went back in. And slowly the place began to look like somewhere a person could live. If this story is reaching you, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments. Have you ever found a place that felt like it had been waiting for you? On the 4th day, she decided to open the safe. It sat on the floor in the corner of the office, a combination dial type, but she had no combination. She had meant to call a locksmith, but she had no money for one, so instead she did the thing she was best at. She listened. She knelt in front of the safe, pressed her ear against the face of it, and turned the dial very slowly, listening for the faint clicks of the wheels inside, the same way she had once listened to an engine and known where it hurt. It took the better part of an hour, but at last she found 3 numbers, and the door swung open with a heavy thunk. There was no gold inside the safe. Della had not expected gold, but there were 3 things that left her sitting still on the cold cement floor. The first was a thick ledger, bound in worn leather, so heavy she had to lift it with both hands. The second was a cedar cigar box, the wood still faintly sweet when she picked it up, lighter than she expected. The third was a yellowed paper envelope, thick, sealed with a single line written across the front in the large, sure hand of a man more used to a wrench than a pen. For whoever keeps her running. Della opened the cigar box first. Inside, rolled carefully in waxed paper, was money. Old bills folded and bound with rotted rubber bands. There was a plastic tube of silver dollars, heavy and cold in her palm. There was a small stack of United States savings bonds, printed in years long past. She did not know what all of it was worth, but she knew it was enough. It was the whole savings of a man who had lived alone. But that was not what made her cry. What made her cry was the ledger. She opened the ledger. The first pages were the ordinary books of a gas station. Dates, names, amounts, $2 of gas, $1.50 for a tire, $5 for spark plugs. The handwriting was firm and even, running through year after year, decade after decade, from the late 1950s to the early 2000s. It was the history of a road, written in small numbers, but when Della turned to the back of the ledger, she found something else. A separate section written by hand, under a heading underlined twice. Carried below that heading was a long list, a date, a sum of money. And beside each sum, instead of a mark for paid, was a single word repeated hundreds of times across the years: forgive. The Sandville transmission, $320. Forgive. They lost a cow that winter. The Lusian boy filled his tank to get him to El Paso to enlist. $18. Forgive. God keep him. Widow Merez, the Buick, brakes, tires, battery, $211. Forgive. She drives it to church. Can't have her walking. The Begay family, water pump out in the dry heat. Forgive. No one gets left on the side of the road. The list went on, page after page. Hundreds of names. Hundreds of times the word forgive. Della sat on the cold cement floor of a gas station in the middle of the desert, and she read 47 years of one man's quiet kindness. A man she had never met, a man who had died before she was grown, a man who had spent his whole life at this crossroads, making sure no one ever had to walk home. She read slowly, line by line, as if reading slowly enough might let her hear the voice of the one who had written it. Some lines were just a name and a number and the word forgive. But some lines Asa had written a few words after, and it was those lines that closed her throat. The Romero boy fixed his car so he could get his mother to the hospital in Albuquerque. Forgive. She didn't make it. I'm still glad he got there in time to say goodbye. There was one line she read over and over, because the number in it startled her. Widow Merez, the Buick, $211. Forgive. 211. The same as the number on the odometer of the truck her grandfather had left her. She knew it was only a coincidence. But sitting there, with one dead man's truck and another dead man's ledger, Della felt as if the small numbers were trying to tell her something. She did not yet have the words to name. Then she opened the envelope. Inside were several things: a metal dog tag, thin and cold, stamped Asa J. Truty, and a string of numbers. A silver St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers, worn smooth on its face from being rubbed too many times. And a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, dated February of 2009, 2 years before Asa died. Della read it in the light coming through the dusty office window. The letter began like this: To whoever is reading this, I don't know who you are. I'm probably dead by the time you find it. I'm writing it because I have no children to tell these things to, and I figure a place has a right to know its own story. My name is Asa Truitt. I was born in 1934, dirt poor, on a ranch not far from here. The winter I was 15, in 1949, my father drove our old truck full of family across this highway in a snowstorm, and it died on us in the middle of the night, in cold that can kill a man. We sat in that freezing cab for hours, and I remember my mother started to pray. Then a pair of headlights came up through the snow. A mechanic stopped. He didn't know us. He lay down under our truck in the snow and fixed the frozen fuel pump with his bare hands. Took the better part of an hour. When he was done, my father tried to press the last few coins in his pocket on the man. The mechanic pushed his hand away. He said something I never forgot. He said, "No one gets left on the side of the road." Then he got in his truck and drove off. I never learned his name. I went to Korea in 1952. I saw things I won't write here. When I came home, I didn't have much left to believe in. But I still remembered the mechanic in the snowstorm. So in 1958, I scraped together what I had, bought this crossroads, and opened the station. I told myself I'd do the thing that man did for me, over and over, until I couldn't do it anymore. I painted that line on the wall so I'd see it every morning. I'll be honest with you. I was never rich. There were years I made almost nothing, after the interstate opened and the cars stopped coming dying, when the town started dying. But I kept booting. Because there were still 11 people in Comanche Wells, and they needed somewhere to buy fuel, fix a water pump, save a car before it died for good. I forgave more debts than I ever collected. You'll see that in the ledger. I don't regret a single one. The money in the cedar box is everything I managed to put away for myself. It isn't much, but it's real. I leave it to you, the one who comes after, along with the station. I ask only one thing, and this is not a legal condition, just the request of a dying man. Keep her running. Keep that line on the wall from fading. When someone comes through here, stuck, out of money, scared, remember that once a man stopped for me in a snowstorm, and that the debt was never paid off, it was only passed on. My nephew Lyle won't come. He only cares about things that can be sold. This place isn't to be sold, it's to be kept. A place will know its keeper. Keep the lights on for the one who comes after. Asa Truitt, February 2009. Della read the letter twice. Then she folded it back up very carefully, set it on the desk, and sat for a long while in the dusty office, one hand around her grandfather's folding knife, one hand around the St. Christopher's medal of a man she had never met. Two things from two men, both gone, both of whom had loved her in their own way, even though one had never known she existed. A good tool finds the hand that needs it, Hollis had once said. Della was beginning to understand what he meant. She took the letter, the ledger, and the box of money to a lawyer in Santa Rosa, a woman Pearl Quintana recommended. The lawyer's name was Marion Cobb, around 50, plain-spoken, who handled rural property matters. Cobb went through everything carefully. She explained that because Della held clear legal title through the tax auction, anything inside the property belonged to her. The redemption period had ended 3 years before, and no heir had stepped forward. There was no legal duty to track down Truitt's family. But Della wanted to try anyway. Not because of the law, but because it felt right. Cobb made a few calls. They learned that Asa's only nephew, a man named Lyle Truitt, had moved away long ago, and that Asa really had died alone, no wife, no children. The money in the box after Cobb had it appraised, the old bills with a collector and the bonds and silver cashed, came to about $9,200. Not a fortune. But to Della, who had $144 to her name, it felt like being handed a future. She did not spend it on herself. She spent it on the station. That autumn, Della began the restoration. She could not do it alone, and she did not want to. The first to come help was an old man named Manny Ortega, a retired mechanic and welder who lived on the edge of Santa Rosa and had known Asa Truitt for 30 years. Manny drove out one morning, walked the whole building, ran his hand over the cinder block, looked up at the tin roof, then said a thing Della would always remember. "Bones are good on this one. Good block. Roof needs doing, but the bones are sound." He charged a fair rate and agreed to teach her some of the work. They did the roof first. Manny and Della stripped the rusted tin, reinforced the wood trusses, and laid new sheeting they bought cheap from a salvage yard in Tucumcari. Della learned to set rivets, to chalk a line, to work up high in the dry desert wind that never quite stopped. Her hands blistered and then hardened. Her skin went brown. Every night she ached, but every night she also felt something she had not felt in years, something close to joy. Not every day was easy. One night, in late October, a windstorm came up out of the west and blew all night with a long shriek like a freight train. And in the morning, Della walked out to find 3 sheets of tin they had laid the week before torn loose and thrown against the fence. A week of work crumpled in the dust. She stood looking at it a long time, and for a moment the old feeling from the nights in the truck rose up in her, the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, the world would tear it back out of her hands. Then she heard Manny's truck on the gravel. The old man got out, looked at the tin, took off his cap and scratched his head, and said one simple thing. "So we do it again. This time we put in the storm screws." They did it again. It took 3 days. No wind ever tore it loose after that. Manny taught her more than how to roof. He taught her to read an old cinder block wall, to know which block was still solid and which had gone soft. He taught her to mix mortar by hand, to tool a joint so the rain ran out instead of soaking in. He taught her to weld. sitting behind her with his hand over her hand to keep the bead even, just the way her grandfather had with that wrench when she was 12. One afternoon, resting in the shade with their backs against the sun-warmed wall, Manny told her that Asa himself had taught him to weld more than 30 years before in this very garage and never charged him a dime. Old Asa told me, Manny said, eyes out on the desert. Manny, this trade isn't to keep for yourself. You learn it, you teach it to the next one. So now I'm teaching it to you. You see that, sir? It just keeps going. Della saw it. For the first time, she began to understand that she was not just fixing a station. She was stepping into a current that had been running long before she ever arrived. She repainted the line on the wall. She climbed a ladder with a brush and a can of red paint, and she traced over every letter, following the faded strokes. No one gets left on the side of the road. When she finished, she walked back out to the road and looked, and the red letters stood out bright against the gray block under a sky that desert blue, and Della felt as though she had brought something back to life that had been dead. The small community around Comanche Wells, once they understood this girl meant to stay, took her in the way rural people do, quietly and steadily. The first to come by was an old woman named Eulalia Mares, who everyone called Lala, who lived a mile down the road and drove an old Buick. Lala drove that car out one afternoon, parked in front of the station, and sat looking at the freshly painted line a long while before she got out. This Buick, she said to Della, her voice trembling, Asa fixed it for me more times than I can count and never took a dollar. After my husband died, he told me, Mrs. Mares, long as you can drive yourself to church, I'll keep this car running. And he kept his word. She looked at Della. Did you know him? I never met him, Della said, but I think I'm starting to. Lala began coming by every Saturday, bringing cornbread and stories. She told Della about Comanche Wells when it was alive, when the highway was busy, when Asa's station was crowded, when the town had a school and 2 stores. She told her how Asa let people run a tab through the whole drought summer of 1977. She told her how he once drove 30 miles in the night to tow a stranded family to safety, then fix their car for free the next morning. He loved that station like he never loved anything else, Lala said. They say he had a girl once, that he was going to marry, who died when he was young. He never married after. That station was his family. And now, she looked at Della, I guess it's yours. Sunday dinner at Wade Hollister's ranch on the far side of the hill was the first time in more than 2 years Della sat down to eat at a table with other people, under a warm roof, with kids fighting over the last piece of cornbread. Wade's wife, Carmen, served her a plate twice the size of everyone else's, and when Della tried to wave it off, she only shook her head and said, You're rebuilding a whole station. You need to eat. Della looked down at her plate and had to blink a few times so no one would see. She had forgotten what it felt like to be fed by someone not out of pity, but just because they wanted her strong. One Saturday, a middle-aged man drove a truck out and parked in front of the station. He stood looking at the red line a long while before he came in, the same way Lala had. He said his name was Tomas Sandoval. Della went still at the name, Sandoval. She had read it in the ledger. My father told me, Tomas said, his voice rough, that the winter he was a boy, our family lost its only cow, and the truck blew a transmission, and Asa fixed it without charging a cent, then pressed $10 into my grandfather's hand to feed the kids. My father carried that his whole life. He looked at Della. I heard somebody young came out to reopen the place. I drove 30 miles just to see if it was true. Della quietly took down the old carried ledger, turned to the line with the Sandoval name, and showed it to him. Tomas read it, and the big man had to turn his face away. When he left, he set an envelope on the workbench. Inside was $320, the exact sum Asa had forgiven his family all those years ago. I know he forgave it, Tomas said before he got in his truck. But that debt's still there in my family. You take it. Use it on the next person. Della took it, and that night she did not put it in her own pocket. She put it in a glass jar on the bench and wrote a slip of paper to tape on the front. Travelers Fund. Della reopened for repair work one November morning. She could not sell fuel yet. The underground tank still needed dealing with, but she hung a hand-painted sign by the road. Pearce. The first to pull in was a feed hauler with a hot engine. Della fixed him in 40 minutes. When he reached for his wallet, she looked up at the line on the wall, then at the carried ledger on the shelf, and took only the cost of the part. The second was a young mother with 2 kids and a flat tire on her way to Albuquerque. Della patched the tire, checked the other 3, topped off the coolant, and took nothing. She took the new ledger she had just bought, opened to the first page and wrote in her own hand, "Young mother, 2 kids, tire, coolant, forgive. They have a long way to go." She had started Asa's ledger again. She had become the keeper. If you're still riding along with us, hit subscribe, because just when Della thought she had finally found home, a polished black truck was about to turn in at that crossroads, carrying everything Asa had warned her about in his letter. Winter passed. Spring came, and with it news the whole county talked about. The New Mexico Department of Transportation announced a project. They would realign Highway 104, build a new interchange, and a private company had proposed building a truck travel plaza right at that interchange. The new interchange, according to the map printed in the Santa Rosa paper, would sit right at the Comanche Wells crossroads, right on the station's lot. A piece of land no one would have paid more than $10 for a month earlier had suddenly become the most valuable corner in 50 miles. The black truck came one April morning. It was a high-end SUV, spotless, nearly impossible on those roads. 2 men got out. The younger wore a tucked-in shirt and designer sunglasses, and had the restless look of a man always thinking about the next thing. The older wore a suit despite the heat and carried a leather case. He walked around the station like a man pricing every square foot, every tree, every block into money. "You the one who bought this place?" the younger one asked, skipping the greeting. "I am," Della said, setting down a wrench. "What can I do for you?" "I'm Lyle Truitt," the younger said. "Asa Truitt was my father's uncle. This place should have been family." He jerked his chin at the man in the suit. "This is Garrett Vance. He represents the developer. We're here to fix a mistake." Vance opened the case, drew out a stack of papers, and smiled the smile people use when they have already decided they will win. "Miss Mercer, is it? Let me be direct, save us both time. The tax auction you bought into had a defect in notice. My client here, Mr. Truitt, is the rightful heir, and he never received proper notice of the foreclosure. That makes your deed vulnerable to being voided. We can take this to court, which would be very expensive and very slow for someone in your position." He paused, letting the threat land. "Or you can accept an offer. We'll pay you $5,000 to drop any claim and leave this month. $5,000 for a place you bought for $10. That's a return of 500 to 1. Not many people get an offer like that." Della looked at the 2 men a long moment. She looked at Lyle Truitt, who carried the Truitt name but had never come to his own uncle's funeral. She looked at Vance, who saw this place and saw only square footage. Then she did the thing she had learned from her grandfather and from a dead man named Asa. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. "I'll think about your offer," she said gently. "But before I decide, you ought to know one thing your uncle, Mr. Truitt, left a letter. I think you should read it." She did not hand them the letter. She only said it existed. She saw something flicker across Lyle Truitt's face, a flash of unease, and Vance's mouth tightened just slightly, because he had been at this long enough to know that the soft words of a person who is not afraid are more dangerous than any shouting. "You've got 2 weeks, Vance said, snapping the case shut. "Then we file." The 2 men got in the truck and drove off, leaving a cloud of yellow dust hanging in the dry air. Della watched the dust settle. Then she went into the office, took the phone off the hook, and called the lawyer, Marion Cobb. If you've come this far with Della, hit subscribe, because what that lawyer found in the county's own records was about to turn the whole thing upside down. Marion Cobb did not sound the least bit worried when Della told her over the phone. "You stay calm," she said. "This isn't the first time I've seen this play. Soon as a piece of land gets valuable, some relative crawls out claiming they never got notice. Sometimes that's true. Mostly it isn't. Let me pull the file." The rest of the story did not happen in courtrooms shouting, but in paper, the way the truth so often defends itself. Cobb spent a week in the Guadalupe County Records Office, going through every page of the foreclosure on the station. And she found everything she needed. She found the certified mail receipts. The state had sent notice of the tax delinquency and the pending sale by certified mail to Lyle Truitt's last known address, 3 separate times across 3 years. 2 of the 3 carried his signature on the return card. She found the published notices. The sale had been advertised in the county paper for 4 straight weeks, exactly as the law required, 3 years before Della ever arrived. She found the record showing the statutory redemption period of 3 years, and that it had passed with no one stepping up to pay the back taxes. Every notice the law demanded had been given in full. Lyle Truitt had not been denied notice. He had been notified repeatedly, and he had chosen to do nothing, because back then the station was worth nothing, and the only things he cared about were things that could be sold. Your deed is solid as bedrock, Cobb told Della when the two sat in her small Santa Rosa office, the file spread across the desk. They've got no case. They're just betting you're a 19-year-old girl with no money who'll get scared and for $5,000. They bet wrong. But Cobb did one thing more, a thing Della had asked her to do. She looked into the problem everyone feared, the reason the station had been called worthless all those years, the underground tanks. And she found that the state of New Mexico ran a cleanup fund for exactly these kinds of old abandoned rural fuel stations, a program almost no one knew about. A piece of land people thought carried a $100,000 burden could actually be cleaned up at almost no cost through that fund, if the owner filed the paperwork the right way. Cobb helped Della file. The last meeting happened at the station itself. Lyle Truitt and Garrett Vance came back, this time with their own lawyer. Marion Cobb sat across from them with a case full of records. Della stood leaning against the workbench, arms folded, silent. Cobb did not raise her voice. She simply opened the case and laid each document down on the bench, slowly the way a mechanic lays each tool in its place. The certified mail receipts, Lyle Truitt's signature on the return cards, the published notices, the record of the expired redemption period. "You're welcome to file," she said mildly. "But I think you should know my client holds a perfect deed, and your client," she looked at Lyle Truitt, "was properly notified 3 times and signs it for it twice. A judge will take about 15 minutes to dismiss your claim, and when he does, you'll be paying the costs." Vance did not answer right away. He looked at the documents. He was a sharp man and he saw that he had lost, but Lyle Truitt could not stand it. "This is my family's property," he snapped. "That old man owed us. This place is worth millions now, and it's in the hands of some homeless girl who bought it for $10. It's not right." And that was when Della spoke. She walked to the shelf, took down the carried ledger, set it on the bench, and opened it to the back, to the pages full of the word forgive. "Mr. Truitt," she said, her voice still gentle. "Your uncle didn't owe you anything. He spent his whole life paying off debts he never owed in the first place. Look," she turned the pages. "The Sandovals lost a cow that winter, he forgave it. The Lujan boy going off to enlist, he filled his tank, forgave it. The widow Merez fixed her car so she could keep getting to church, forgave it." She closed the ledger. "He died alone at this place, Mr. Truitt. You didn't come to the funeral? Now you come because it's worth money. That's exactly what he was afraid of. I know because he wrote your name in a letter." She did not hand him the letter. She did not need to. The room went quiet. Outside, the wind moaned through the canopy. Lyle Truitt looked at the ledger, then looked away, and for a moment Della saw on his face not anger but something small and ashamed, the shame of a man realizing he had been wrong about the worth of a thing his whole life. Vance stood, snapped his case shut. "We withdraw?" he said flatly. They left, and this time the cloud of dust behind the black truck never came back. Della later learned that the developer built his travel plaza anyway, on a different lot 2 miles to the west, where the land was cheap and the owner willing to sell. The new interchange was shifted a little. Asa Truitt Station kept standing at its old crossroads, and now, with the road rebuilt, cars began passing by again. Not many, but enough. If this story is meaning something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The state cleanup fund came through that summer. A crew came out, dug up the old underground tanks, treated the soil, and filled it back in, at almost no cost to Della at all. The burden that had frightened everyone for 20 years turned out to be a thing that only needed the right person willing to file one form. By the end of summer, the station could sell fuel again. Manny Ortega helped Della swap the 2 old pumps for a refurbished one they pulled from a closed station in Tucumcari. And one August morning, for the first time in 20 years, a car pulled into the Comanche Wells station and filled its tank, and Della stood under the canopy, in the shade that smelled of gasoline and dust, and felt a thing she had never felt in all her life. She understood for the first time what the word home actually meant. She did not go back to her old life. She did not call her mother. She had thought she would miss her, but she found she did not the way she expected. She missed an idea of a mother, a version that had never quite existed, the one who could have loved her without trying to push her out. The real person, the one who had packed the suitcase and set it by the door, she did not miss. She understood now why Asa had painted that line on the wall in 1958, after coming home from a war and after losing the girl he loved. Because sometimes the only way to live with a wound is to turn it into a promise made to strangers. Comanche Wells did not come roaring back to life as a big town. It stayed a small place in the middle of the desert sentence, but the station became its heart again. Lala drove the Buick out every Saturday, and Della kept it running, just as Asa had. Wade came by with coffee on cold mornings. Pearl Quintana, who had paid that first $10, drove out from Santa Rosa once a month, and once she brought a small box. Inside was a hand-painted metal sign she'd had made. It read Trout Station, Della Mercer, Keeper, Open. Della hung it by the door, right under the St. Christopher medal. She kept writing in the new ledger. She called it the second carried book. She wrote the names of the people she fixed for free, the ones who pulled into that crossroads out of money and scared with a long way still to go. A young soldier on his way home on leave broke, engine overheating. Della fixed it, filled the tank, took nothing and wrote, filled his tank to get him home to Clovis. God keep him. A migrant family with a truck loaded high and a tire blown out in 100-degree heat. Della patched it, gave the kids ice water, checked the whole vehicle and wrote, this family has a long way to go. Forgive. She was passing on a debt she had never owed, a debt Asa had never owed either, a debt that began with a nameless mechanic in a snowstorm in 1949, a debt that has never paid off, only passed on. The glass jar marked Traveler's Fund on the bench never ran empty. People dropped in their loose change, a 5, sometimes a 20. A long-haul trucker, after Della fixed his alternator at midnight and took no money, came back the next week and pushed $50 into the jar. Then said, there was a man at this station once who did that for my dad. I don't remember his name, but I remember him. Della said nothing. She just pointed up at the red line on the wall, and the trucker nodded like he understood. One September afternoon, close to 2 years from the day her suitcase was set on the step, Della sat on an old metal chair outside the station door and watched the sun go down over the desert. The sky went from gold to rose to deep violet. Wind came in off the far hills, carrying dust and juniper and that dry, clean smell she now knew by heart. Behind her, the station glowed warm with light. Her grandfather's knife sat in her pocket. Asa's St. Christopher medal hung by the door, catching the last light. The second carried book lay open on her lap, 20 pages already filled. She thought about Hollis, her grandfather, who had put a knife in her hand and told her a good tool finds the hand that needs it. He had been right, but she had had it backward. She used to think she was the one holding the tool. Now she understood that sometimes she was the tool, and this station was the hand that had found her. This place had stood at its crossroads 20 years, holding the ledger and the letter and the medal, patient, the way a hand holds something precious that is not its own. And when Della had finally driven in, out of money and out of hope, and walked through the door, the station had decided she was the one it had been waiting for. She thought about Asa Truitt, who had never met her, who had died before she was grown, who had left everything he had to whoever keeps her running, whoever comes after. Della had been a stranger to him, just as he wrote, but the station had known her. That is the thing about people who leave something behind for strangers. They are not really strangers to the one they leave it for. They are family in the way that matters most, which is not the way of blood, but the way of recognition. Asa Truitt had recognized something in the future. The chance of a person who would come along and need exactly what he had to give, and he had trusted the station to hold his gifts until that person arrived. The station had done its job, and when Della had finally knelt down and listened to the wheels of that safe, the way you listen to an engine, it had shown her where to look. A place will know its keeper. Asa had written that line in his letter in 2009, and Della had read it a dozen times since, and now she was beginning to understand it. Some debts are not debts of money. They are promises, passed from one hand to the next, from a snowstorm in 1949 to a dusty floor safe to a 19-year-old girl watching the sun go down over the desert. And promises passed on like that never disappear. They only wait. They wait for the next person who can lift them. Della Mercer was 18 years old and put out of her own home. She had $187.40 to her name, and she spent 10 of them on an abandoned gas station in the middle of the New Mexico desert. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what has someone you never met left behind for you? We'd love to hear your story. We'll see you in the next one.